Hey guys. Tonight we arrive before the sun does. When the sky is still unsure if it wants to be night or morning. And you're standing outside a small, wooden Pony Express station with a key that feels colder than it should. The building doesn't look impressive, no marble columns, no dramatic clock tower, but in a moment, it will quietly decide how fast news travels across an entire continent. You probably won't survive this job if you like sleeping in, value your fingers being free of ink stains, or expect your coffee to still be warm when you remember it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what the local time is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slide the key into the lock, and it resists just a little, as if the building itself is stretching awake. When the door finally opens, the smell greets you first: old wood, dust, leather, and a faint metallic tang from iron fixtures. This is where your day begins. Not with galloping hooves or dramatic handoffs, but with silence and a sorting table that waits patiently in the half-light. You step inside and close the door behind you, muting the outside world. The station is simple: a long wooden table scarred with knife marks and ink blots. Shelves lined with pigeonholes, canvas mail sacks slumped in corners like sleeping animals. A single oil lamp hangs overhead, its flame flickering as you light it. The glow doesn't banish the darkness so much as negotiate with it, carving out a small, manageable circle of visibility. This is the unglamorous heart of the Pony Express. Most people remember the riders, young, wiry men racing against time, but historians still argue whether the true backbone of the system was actually people like you. The sorters who made sure every letter went in the right direction before a horse ever took a step. Without you, speed would be chaos, and chaos, as you'll quickly learn, is very bad for mail. You hang your coat on a peg and roll up your sleeves. The wood of the table is cool under your palms, grounding you. Outside, somewhere far off, a rooster gives it a try, sounding only moderately confident. Dawn is coming, but for now, this is your domain. You start by opening yesterday's ledger. Its pages stiff and slightly curled at the edges. The ink has faded to a soft brown, and some entries are smudged where a tired hand dragged across the page. One mainstream fact you're quietly living right now is that Pony Express stations like this were spaced roughly 10 to 15 miles apart. Designed so horses, and humans, could keep going without collapsing. The entire system was built for endurance, not comfort. And that philosophy extends straight to your sorting table. You lay out the tools of your trade: twine for tying bundles, sealing wax and a stubby candle, a stack of blank tally sheets, and a pen whose nib has been sharpened so many times it's beginning to look philosophical about its own existence. There's also a small bell near the door, not for decoration, but to signal riders without shouting. Early mornings favor quiet cooperation. As you open the first canvas sack, dust puffs into the air, catching the lamplight. You try not to sneeze. The letters inside are light, almost deceptively so, given how much hope, urgency, and impatience they contain. Business contracts, personal notes, newspaper dispatches, all folded, sealed, and entrusted to a system that prides itself on speed but survives on routine. There's a quirky tidbit you've heard repeated in stations like this: some sorters swore that certain letters felt heavier than others. Not because of their contents, but because of the news inside. A marriage proposal, a warning, a fortune won or lost. Rationally, you know paper weighs paper, but at this hour, with the lamp hissing softly, it's easy to believe otherwise. You begin the methodical process: read the destination, check it against the route map pinned to the wall, slide the letter into the correct pigeonhole. Over and over, your movements become smooth, almost meditative. This is not a job for rushing. Riders may be fast, but you cannot be careless. A single misfiled letter could add days to its journey. And somewhere down the line, someone will be tapping their foot, blaming the horse. You pause to glance at the map. It's hand-drawn, edges frayed, annotated with notes only sorters understand. A faint coffee ring mars one corner, probably left by someone who, like you, believed caffeine could bend time. Historians still argue whether these informal, constantly updated maps were more reliable than official route charts. But standing here, You trust the scribbles more than anything printed back east. The quiet is broken only by the soft rustle of paper and the occasional creak of the building settling. You make a small joke to yourself, if anyone could see you now. Hunched over letters before dawn. They might think you're auditioning for the world's least exciting heist movie. The Great Mail Sort of 1860. Coming soon to absolutely no theaters. As the sky outside lightens from black to deep blue, you feel the day stretching ahead of you. This is just the beginning. Your fingers already carry the faint smell of ink, and you know it won't leave anytime soon. You take a breath, steady and slow, and reach for the next sack, ready to continue the quiet work that keeps a continent connected. The lamp has settled into a steady glow now, and with it comes the small rituals that make the morning bearable. You set a tin cup on the edge of the table and pour in coffee from a squat pot that looks older than some of the towns on your route. The steam rises slowly, carrying a bitter, comforting smell that mixes with leather and dust. Canvas sacks surround you, their seams rough under your fingers, each one tied with knots that suggest different hands, different moods, and different levels of patience. You take a careful sip and immediately regret not waiting another 30 seconds. It's hot enough to remind you that safety standards are still more of a suggestion than a concept. Still, the warmth settles in your chest, and you feel marginally more prepared for the hours ahead. This, you've learned, is one of the unsung tools of the job. Historians still argue whether coffee or sheer stubbornness powered most 19th century logistics. But standing here, you're willing to vote for both. You turn your attention to the sacks themselves. They're made of thick canvas, reinforced at the corners, designed to survive rain, dust, and the occasional fall from a moving horse. Each one carries a faint history in its smell: sun-dried fabric, sweat, sometimes a hint of tobacco. A mainstream fact you're living with is that Pony Express mail was intentionally kept light, with letters often written on thin paper to reduce weight. Every ounce mattered when horses were expected to sprint between stations. You untie a knot and feel the resistance give way. Inside, the letters are bundled neatly, some secured with red wax, others with simple folds. Your job is to undo just enough order to replace it with better order. You spread them across the table, aligning edges, smoothing corners. There's a strange satisfaction in making chaos lie flat. As you work, you notice the small comforts that someone before you has left behind. A folded rag for wiping ink from fingers. A stub of candle kept just in case the lamp misbehaves. Even a pencil, technically unnecessary, but useful when your pen decides it's done for the day. These items are never listed in official inventories, but they matter more than the ledger ever will. You reach for the route board on the wall and check it against the letters in front of you. Sacramento, St. Joseph, Salt Lake City, names that feel distant, yet oddly intimate when you handle enough correspondence addressed there. There's a quiet joke among station workers that you know the handwriting of strangers better than your own relatives. By the end of the week, you can spot a merchant's letters from 50 paces just by the slant of his script. Your fingers begin to pick up a rhythm. Sort, stack, slide. The canvas sacks slump further as they empty, like tired animals finally allowed to rest. Outside, the light has shifted again, the blue thinning toward grey. You imagine riders waking up in nearby stations, pulling on boots, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Soon, they'll be here, and the quiet preparation will pay off. There's a quirky tidbit you remember hearing from an old assorter. Some stations kept a small stone on the table. Not for any official reason, but as a kind of grounding object. If the work started to feel overwhelming, you'd pick it up, feel its weight, and remind yourself that not everything needs to move fast. You glance around and, sure enough, there's a smooth pebble near the ledger. You hadn't noticed it before, but now it feels reassuringly ordinary. You smile to yourself. If modern productivity gurus could see this setup, they'd probably try to sell it as a mindfulness retreat. Rustic furniture, repetitive tasks, no notifications. Of course, they'd leave out the part where mistakes ripple across thousands of miles. You take another sip of coffee, this time successfully avoiding injury, and continue sorting. A letter catches your eye. Its paper slightly thicker, its seal unusually neat. You don't open it. Privacy is sacred, but you can't help imagining its journey. Historians still argue whether Pony Express sorters ever intentionally peeked at letters. But the unspoken rule here is clear. Curiosity stops at the seal. As the table fills with neatly arranged stacks, You start tying them with twine. Careful not to crease the paper. Each bundle is labeled, destination written clearly. Your handwriting is functional, not elegant, but legible enough to save someone else a headache down the line. You've learned that clarity is a kindness. The smells of the room deepen as the morning wears on. Ink sharpens, coffee fades, canvas warms. You wipe your fingers on the rag and notice faint black smudges already forming permanent alliances with your skin. This is your uniform, in a way, temporary tattoos of diligence. You pause, stretch your shoulders, and listen. The station is no longer asleep, it's waiting. You glance at the bell by the door and imagine the sound it will make soon. Crisp and purposeful, for now, though, it remains silent, and you enjoy the rare luxury of being ahead of schedule. One last joke drifts through your mind as you finish the final bundle. Somewhere in the future, people will send messages instantly and still complain it's too slow. You tighten the twine, set the bundle aside, and reach for the next sack, ready to keep the morning moving at its careful, unhurried pace. You step back from the table just long enough to let your eyes rest on the wall map. The one that's been patched, redrawn, and quietly argued with more times than anyone can remember. It hangs there like a tired teacher, covered in penciled lines, tiny notes, and pins that mark stations scattered across plains, mountains, and deserts. This is where the abstraction of distance becomes personal. You're not just sorting letters anymore, you're negotiating geography. You move closer, coffee cup in hand, and trace a finger along one of the routes. The paper is soft from years of touch. These lines represent the Pony Express's most famous boast: mail delivered across the continent in about 10 days. That's the mainstream fact everyone remembers. Usually delivered with dramatic music and galloping horses. What they forget is that this speed depends on you understanding which rider takes which bundle. And when. You check destinations against the map, matching names to routes almost automatically now. Some towns are familiar, others barely more than dots. You've learned that not all dots are equal. A station might look insignificant on paper, but if it sits at the edge of a mountain pass or a river crossing, it suddenly becomes very important. Historians still argue whether route planners prioritized speed or reliability more, but standing here, you can tell they were constantly compromising between the two. You pull down a small slate board from a hook and jot a few notes, minor adjustments based on weather reports from the previous day. A creek that's running high, a trail that's become muddy. These aren't official updates, but they matter. Riders trust the station sorters to make these judgment calls, and you feel the quiet weight of that trust settle on your shoulders. There's a strange intimacy to these maps. You know them better than the towns themselves. You could probably sketch the route to Salt Lake City from memory. Even if you've never been there, it's like knowing someone only through their letters, familiar, but incomplete. You wonder, briefly, what it would feel like to follow one of these lines all the way to its end. As you return to the table, you notice how the light has shifted again. The oil lamp is now competing with daylight seeping through the window, softening the shadows. This is your favorite time, when night and morning overlap, and the world feels suspended. You use it to double-check your work, sliding each bundle next to its corresponding route note. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some stations supposedly had sorters who refused to work without singing softly to themselves, believing it kept the routes straight in their heads. You don't sing, but you do murmur town names under your breath. A quiet litany that keeps mistakes at bay. If anyone overheard, they might think you're casting spells. You pause at one bundle, hesitating. The destination is clear, but the timing is tight. Sending it now means pushing a rider hard. Holding it risks delay. This is where the job stops being mechanical and becomes human. You weigh the options, then decide. The twine tightens with a small, decisive tug. You've chosen speed this time. You glance at the ledger and make a note. The pen scratching softly, ink pools slightly at the end of the line. A tiny imperfection you smooth with a quick blot. You've learned to accept that not everything will be perfect, but it should always be intentional. Outside, you hear movement, footsteps, the snort of a horse. The day is asserting itself. You feel a flicker of satisfaction knowing you're ready. The routes are clear, the bundles are lined. For a moment, you allow yourself a small, private pride. This map, this table, this quiet work, it all adds up. You take one last look at the wall, committing the routes to memory again, and return to your place at the table. The letters are ready to move. And soon, so will you. In your own way, by standing still and letting the system flow around you. You pick up the first bundle meant for the next rider and feel the slight unevenness of the letters inside. Each one has its own texture, some paper thin and crisp. Others soft and almost cloth-like from being folded too many times. This is where the abstract lines on the map turn into human voices. You're not just handling mail, you're handling people who aren't here to speak for themselves. You begin opening the sack fully and spreading out the remaining letters. Reading destinations carefully, a merchant ordering supplies, a mother writing to a son who left months ago, a short note from someone who clearly didn't have much to say but felt the need to say it anyway. You imagine the writers hunched over desks by lamplight, much like you, wondering if their words will arrive in time to matter. One mainstream fact quietly guiding your hands is that Pony Express riders typically carried about 20 pounds of mail. A surprisingly small weight considering the distance involved. That limit makes your sorting feel almost surgical. You group letters not just by route, but by urgency, by size, by how easily they'll fit into the rider's mochila without bending corners. The letters must survive the journey intact, dignity matters. Even for paper. You slide one letter into a stack and notice the seal, blue wax. Pressed with a careful hand. You don't know who sent it, but you can tell it was important to them. There's a moment of stillness as you hold it. A quiet acknowledgement between strangers separated by miles and time. Then you let it go, placing it exactly where it belongs. A quirky tidbit drifts back to you from a story told over a late supper. Some sorters claimed they could predict the tone of a letter by its handwriting alone. Tight, upright script meant business. Flowing curves meant affection. You're not sure you believe it. But after enough mornings like this, patterns do start to feel real. Historians still argue whether these informal observations ever influenced sorting decisions. But you suspect they influenced how carefully certain letters were handled. You shift your weight, stretching your back, and glance toward the window. The sky is pale now, washed clean of night. You can hear a horse stamping outside. Impatient. The riders are close. Your pace quickens just a fraction, not rushed, but alert. This is the moment when preparation meets consequence. You check each bundle against the ledger, ticking off destinations with a practiced flick of the pen. The ink smells sharp, almost metallic. You smear one mark slightly and sigh, wiping it away with the rag. If there's a patron saint of sorters, you imagine they'd have perpetually inky fingers and an endless supply of patience. As you work, you notice how the room seems to shrink around you. The outside world fades, replaced by the soft rhythm of sorting. You make a small joke to yourself. If meditation were measured in paper cuts avoided, you'd be a master by now. You flex your fingers, grateful that today has been merciful so far. One letter slips from your grasp and flutters to the floor. You freeze, heart jumping just a little, then relax as you pick it up. No damage. Still, it's a reminder of how fragile this system is. Speed, trust, and human hands, hardly a foolproof combination. Yet somehow it works. You place the final letters into their bundles and retie the twine, making sure the knots are snug but not cruel. Each bundle is stacked neatly by the door now, ready for pickup. You line them up like quiet promises. There's a moment of reflection as you look at the stacks. These letters will cross deserts, mountains, and rivers. They'll be read, reread, maybe even kept for years. And your role in all of it is invisible. No one will think about the person who stood at a table before sunrise, making sure everything went where it should. You straighten the stacks one last time and step back, listening to the building breathe around you. Outside, a rider clears his throat. The day is officially in motion, and you're ready to hand it off. By the time the first rider steps inside, your fingers already feel like they've been dipped in ink and dust and sworn allegiance to both. You notice it when you flex them, fine black lines tracing the creases of your skin. Tiny grey smudges along the nails. They won't wash off easily. This is the physical side of the job no one mentions in the heroic retellings. Mail leaves its mark. The rider gives you a nod, brief but sincere. There's no time for conversation. Not really. You hand over the first bundle, and he weighs it instinctively, palms testing balance and heft. He trusts your judgment without question. That trust is a mainstream fact of the Pony Express system. Riders depended on station workers to get the load exactly right, because even a small imbalance could matter after hours in the saddle. As he turns to leave, you're already back at the table, Checking the next stack. The room feels warmer now. The combined effect of daylight and movement. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, catching the sun. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand and immediately regret it. Adding a faint ink smear to your forehead. Congratulations, you now look like a person who has been arguing passionately with paperwork. You take a moment to clean your hands as best you can, rubbing them with the rag until the worst of the ink fades. It doesn't disappear, just softens, like a memory that refuses to fully let go. You've learned that by midday, your hands will tell the story of your morning better than any ledger. You return to the table and notice the subtle changes in the paper itself. Some letters have absorbed moisture from the air, edges curling slightly. Others are stiff and dry, almost brittle. You adjust your handling accordingly, sliding instead of lifting, supporting corners so nothing tears. Historians still argue whether sorters developed these techniques intentionally or simply learned through painful trial and error. But either way, the knowledge lives in your hands now. A small pile of forms sits off to one side, receipts, tallies, notes that exist solely to prove that the mail existed at all. You update them carefully, pen scratching out neat columns. Your handwriting slows here, becoming more deliberate. There's something about official paperwork that demands respect, even when you know it will be filed away and forgotten. You pause when you notice a blot of ink spreading across one page, blooming like a dark flower. You sigh softly and dab at it with the rag, muttering a mild complaint to no one. This counts as one of your 3 daily grumbles, carefully rationed. Any more than that, and the day feels longer than it already is. Another rider arrives, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. You exchange the same nod, the same efficient handoff. There's a rhythm forming now. Sort, bundle, hand off, record. The station hums with quiet purpose. Outside, hooves strike the ground and fade, carrying your careful work with them. You glance at your fingers again. Tiny paper fibers cling to them, caught in the ink. A quirky tidbit you've heard resurfaces. Some sorters claimed they could tell how busy a station was by how their hands felt at the end of the day. Smooth days meant fewer letters. Rough days meant news was moving fast. You suspect this might be true, if only because your fingertips are already starting to feel sanded down. The smell of ink grows stronger as you open a fresh bottle, tipping it carefully into the inkwell. You've learned to do this slowly. Rush, and you'll spill. Spill, and you'll spend the next hour pretending not to notice the spreading stain while quietly resenting yourself. You pour just enough, then set the bottle aside, satisfied. As you work, you become aware of the subtle sounds of the station, the creak of wood as someone shifts outside, the soft clink of metal, the whisper of paper. These sounds blend into a kind of background music, steady and unobtrusive. You think, briefly, that if sleep had a soundtrack, it might sound a lot like this: repetitive, gentle, predictable. You make another note in the ledger and pause to read back over the entries. Everything aligns, routes, counts, times. There's comfort in that alignment, a sense that the world, at least in this small corner, is behaving as it should. Historians still argue whether the Pony Express was ever truly efficient in economic terms. But emotionally, moments like this feel invaluable. You stretch your neck, rolling your shoulders to ease the stiffness creeping in. The day is still young, but the work has weight. You remind yourself to breathe slowly, evenly. There's no prize for finishing fastest. The reward is finishing well. A letter slips slightly out of alignment in one stack, and you fix it immediately, smoothing the edges. This attention to detail might seem excessive, but you know better. Small errors grow legs and walk away when you're not looking. You glance toward the door, watching dust settle in the sunlight. Another rider will arrive soon. Your hands, stained and tired already, are ready. They rest on the table, familiar with its scratches and grooves, waiting for the next task. You take a final moment to flex your fingers, accepting the ink, the dust, the marks of the morning as part of the job. This is what it feels like to be useful in a quiet way. And with that thought settled comfortably in your mind, you reach for the next bundle and continue. You notice the shift in the air before anyone says a word. The riders waiting outside grow restless, horses shifting their weight, leather creaking softly. This is the moment when speed starts whispering in your ear, telling you to hurry, to shave seconds wherever you can. You acknowledge it politely, and then ignore it. You've learned that this job isn't about being fast. It's about being correct while everyone else is in a rush. You lift a bundle and feel the familiar internal calculation begin. Weight, destination, timing. If you send this now, the rider will push hard. If you hold it, the next station will absorb the delay. Speed versus accuracy. This is the quiet contest that defines your day. A mainstream fact sits behind your hesitation. Pony Express riders changed horses roughly every 10 miles. But the mail itself could only move as fast as the slowest decision in the chain. You retie a knot you're not fully satisfied with, tightening it just a fraction. Twine fibers bite into your fingers, leaving faint impressions that will linger longer than you expect. You've developed a feel for these knots over time. Too loose and they slip. Too tight and they damage the paper. There's a sweet spot, and you hit it more often than not. A rider leans against the doorframe, watching without impatience, but with intent. You feel the pressure anyway. It's not unkind, it's practical. Everyone here knows the system only works if each person does their part without cutting corners. Historians still argue whether the Pony Express culture valued discipline over individual heroics. But standing here, you can tell discipline wins most mornings. You check a destination twice, then a third time, somewhere deep in your mind. A small voice jokes that this is how mistakes are born, overthinking. Another voice replies that this is how mistakes are prevented. You side with the second voice and move on. There's a quirky tidbit you remember from a conversation long ago. Some stations reportedly timed sorters. Unofficially, just to see who could work fastest without errors. The results were never posted. The lesson was always the same: those who rushed made mistakes. And those mistakes echoed. Your content not to be part of any imaginary competition. You hand off another bundle, watching the rider secure it carefully. He gives you a quick smile, gratitude flickering across his face. It's gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by focus. The door opens, daylight floods in, and then he's gone, carrying your careful decisions with him. Back at the table, you pause, letting the moment settle. Your breathing slows. You wipe your hands again, though you know it's futile. Ink has decided to be part of you today. You glance at the remaining stacks and feel a quiet satisfaction. There's still work to do, but nothing feels out of control. You straighten one pile that doesn't need straightening, just because it feels right. This, you realize, is how you keep the balance, not just in the mail, but in yourself. Accuracy first, speed will follow. You hear the riders before you really see them, the low murmur of voices, the soft clink of tack, the steady breathing of horses waiting just outside. When they step in, they bring the road with them. Dust clings to their boots and hems, and the smell of leather and animal warmth briefly overpowers the ink and paper that define your world. These moments are short, but they matter. This is where your quiet, stationary work meets motion. One rider sets his cap on the table for a second, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his palm. He looks tired in a way that sleep doesn't quite fix. You slide a bundle toward him, and he nods, checking the label without ceremony. There's a mutual understanding here. You don't need to explain, he doesn't need to ask. A mainstream fact hums beneath this exchange. Pony Express riders were often teenagers or men in their early 20s. Chosen for lightweight and endurance, but relying heavily on the steadiness of station workers to keep them moving. You notice how carefully he handles the mail, as if it might bruise. This is the quiet trust part of the system, unspoken but essential. Riders trust you to sort correctly, you trust them to ride true. Historians still argue whether this trust was formalized or simply grew out of necessity. But standing here, it feels like something more personal than policy. Another rider waits his turn, leaning slightly, conserving energy. You hand him his bundle, and he smiles, quick and fleeting. You think, not for the first time, that smiles are expensive out here, used sparingly, but valued. You make a small joke to yourself that if nodding were a currency, this place would be incredibly wealthy. As they come and go, you remain anchored to the table. You answer the occasional question, anything heavy today? Or, weather notes? With short, precise replies. You don't embellish. Riders don't want stories, they want certainty. You point to the map once, tapping a penciled note about a rough patch of trail. He nods again. That's enough. A quirky tidbit you've heard resurfaces as you watch them leave. Some riders believed that a sorter's mood affected the ride. As if calm hands led to calm horses. There's no proof of this, of course, but you keep your movements smooth and your tone even. Just in case. It costs nothing to be steady. When the door closes behind the last rider for this stretch, the station exhales. The sudden quiet feels heavier than before, like a blanket settling. You stand still for a moment, hands resting on the table, listening to the fading hoofbeats. This is the afterimage of motion, and it always surprises you how peaceful it feels. You return to the ledger, noting departure times with care. Ink glides more easily now, the nib warmed by use. You catch yourself slowing down, savoring the absence of urgency. This is the rhythm of the day, bursts of intensity followed by long stretches of methodical calm. You glance at the door again, half expecting another rider, but none comes. Not yet. You take a breath, roll your shoulders, and allow yourself a small, private satisfaction. The system is moving, and you've done your part. The quiet doesn't last forever. It never does. Somewhere beyond the walls, clouds are making decisions, and you can feel it in the air before anyone mentions the weather. The light through the window dulls slightly, losing its crisp edge. You pause mid-entry in the ledger, pen hovering, listening. A distant rumble might be thunder, or it might just be the building settling. Out here, rumors and weather arrive the same way, softly, then all at once. You step closer to the window and peer out. The sky is a pale grey now, layered like old paper, not threatening exactly, but suggestive. You make a small note on the slate board, possible delay westbound. It's not official, but it's enough to make riders think twice about pushing too hard. A mainstream fact you've absorbed over time is that weather was one of the greatest variables in Pony Express timing. Snow, rain, and heat all reshaped schedules, often without warning. Back at the table, you shuffle the remaining bundles, adjusting their order. You're not changing destinations, just sequence. Who goes first? Who can wait? This is where gossip sneaks in. A rider earlier mentioned a washed-out crossing 2 stations down. Another muttered something about bandits. Though that might have been bravado talking, historians still argue whether bandit threats were as common as popular stories suggest. But the rumors alone are enough to influence how carefully you plan. You lean in and double-check a label, smoothing the paper flat. Your fingers feel the slight tremor of humidity creeping into the room. Ink behaves differently when the air changes, spreading more than you'd like. You compensate instinctively, pressing lighter, blotting sooner. It's a small adjustment, but it matters. There's a quirky tidbit you've heard repeated with a straight face. Some station workers believe storms followed mail. Not the other way around, that important news somehow attracted bad weather. You don't believe it, but as another low rumble rolls through the distance, you allow yourself a thin smile. If letters controlled clouds, your ledger would be a meteorological device. A rider steps back inside, shaking his head slightly. Looks like it's coming, he says. You nod and point to the adjusted stacks. He follows your finger, understanding immediately. This is the language you share: gestures, glances, minimal words. He trusts you to read the situation, just as you trust him to ride through it. You hand him a smaller bundle this time. Lighter, easier to manage if conditions turn rough. He notices and gives you a look of appreciation that doesn't need translation. Speed is important, but survival is more so. You make a quiet joke to yourself that the mail may be urgent. But it's rarely urgent enough to outrun common sense. As he leaves, you update the ledger again, noting the weather advisory in the margin. The ink feathers slightly, but it's still legible. You consider rewriting it, then decide against it. Perfection is less useful than timeliness here. The station grows dimmer as clouds thicken. You light a second lamp, its flame steady and patient. The smell of oil joins the familiar mix. You realize you're slightly hungry, but the thought floats away, replaced by the steady focus of the task. Lunch can wait, the sky cannot. Another rumor drifts in with the next rider, talk of a delayed delivery 2 days back. Blamed on nothing more dramatic than confusion at a station much like yours. You feel a flicker of solidarity with that unseen sorter. Mistakes happen, the system absorbs them and moves on. Historians still argue whether these small human errors were the true weakness of the Pony Express. But you think they were also its strength. Humans adapt. You adjust the order once more, stacking the remaining bundles neatly. Outside, the first drops of rain tap against the roof. Soft and irregular, the sound is oddly soothing, a counterpoint to the quiet inside. You breathe more slowly, letting the rhythm settle you. A final rider arrives for this stretch, glancing at the sky, then at you. You hand over his mail and add a brief note about conditions ahead. He nods, jaw set, ready. As he turns to go, you feel the familiar mix of relief and concern. Your part is done, the road takes over now. You stand alone again, listening to rain and distant hoofbeats fading into it. The station feels smaller, cozier, wrapped in weather. You return to the table, tidy what little remains, and wait. Rumors will pass, storms will move on, the mail, one way or another, will keep going. Time stretches in a peculiar way once the rush has passed. The rain settles into a steady rhythm outside. And inside the station, the urgency dissolves into something softer. You realize, almost with surprise, that your stomach has been trying to get your attention for a while now. Lunch, such as it is, has arrived, not announced by a bell or a break, but by a quiet, persistent hollow feeling. You move to a small shelf near the back wall where a modest collection of personal items lives. From a tin, you pull out a piece of bread that's more sturdy than fresh. And from another, a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. This is the kind of meal that doesn't interrupt your work so much as accompany it. A mainstream fact that rarely makes it into grand histories is that Pony Express station workers often ate standing up between tasks, because stopping completely felt inefficient. You take a bite, chewing slowly, leaning against the table. The bread tastes faintly of the tin, the cheese sharp enough to wake you up just a little. It's not a feast, but it's grounding. You sip from your coffee cup, now lukewarm, and decide that warm is overrated anyway. Historians still argue whether these small, functional meals were a hardship or simply normal for the time. But right now, it feels adequate, and that's enough. As you eat, you glance over the ledger again, eyes skimming familiar entries. Your hand hovers near the pen, ready to make corrections if needed. You've learned not to fully disengage. Even during lunch, the station doesn't pause just because you do. Still, the pace is gentler now, and you allow yourself a moment to breathe. There's a quirky tidbit you remember hearing from a traveler passing through. Some station workers supposedly believed eating too much at midday made the afternoon feel longer. You don't know if it's true, but you keep your portions small, just in case. Besides, you've got work hard and priorities. Full stomachs are nice, but clear heads are nicer. You finish the last bite and wrap the remaining food carefully, returning it to the shelf. Crumbs are brushed into your palm and discreetly disposed of outside the door. You wipe your hands, though the ink stains remain. Unimpressed by your efforts, you flex your fingers again, feeling the stiffness ease slightly now that you've paused. The rain softens, tapping more gently on the roof. You listen to it, letting the sound fill the quiet spaces in your thoughts. This is the kind of moment that sneaks up on you, peaceful not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening exactly as it should. You make a small joke to yourself that if this were a modern office, someone would schedule a meeting to discuss how calm it feels. A rider doesn't arrive, but a messenger from a nearby station does. Ducking inside to escape the rain, you exchange a few quiet words, nothing urgent. Just confirmations. Routes are holding, delays are manageable. You nod, feeling reassured. The system is bending, not breaking. You return to the table and straighten a stack that's already straight. More habit than necessity. The afternoon is beginning its slow approach. And you're ready for it. Your lunch has done its job, no fanfare, no interruption, just enough fuel to keep the quiet work going. You take one last look at the rain, then turn back to the ledger, pen in hand, settled once more into the gentle flow of the day. The afternoon light creeps back in as the rain eases, and with it comes a different kind of mail. You recognize it before you even read the labels. The envelopes are more uniform, the handwriting restrained, almost cautious. Government dispatches, official correspondence, paper that carries weight without being heavy. You instinctively straighten a little, as if posture alone could help you handle these properly. You separate these letters from the rest, giving them their own space on the table. A mainstream fact quietly guiding you here is that the Pony Express was originally designed with government contracts in mind, particularly for moving political and military information quickly between the coasts. These letters may look plain, but they often matter more than all the personal notes combined, at least to the people in power. You don't open them, of course, but you notice the details. The seals are precise, the paper is consistent, there's less emotion in the way they're folded, more intention. You imagine clerks far away drafting these messages carefully, knowing they'll be read by people who make decisions that ripple outward. You wonder, briefly, how many lives are quietly influenced by the contents of these envelopes as they pass through your hands. There's a strange stillness when you handle official mail. You lower your movements, almost unconsciously. Even the pen seems to scratch more softly as you note their passage in the ledger. Historians still argue whether Pony Express workers fully understood the importance of the government mail they handled. But you suspect understanding wasn't required, only respect. A quirky tidbit surfaces from an old story told at another station. One sorter claimed he could tell when a letter contained bad news, simply by how carefully it was sealed. You don't know if that's true, but you notice one envelope with an extra layer of wax, smoothed to perfection. You pause for a fraction of a second longer than usual before placing it in its bundle. Then move on. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. You label the bundle clearly, double-checking the route. There's no room for improvisation here. Official mail follows the plan exactly. Weather and rumors aside, you make sure the twine is secure, the label legible. You even adjust the stack so it sits perfectly square, just in case neatness counts for something beyond your own peace of mind. As you work, you hear a rider approaching, footsteps measured. When he enters, you meet his eyes briefly and gesture to the government bundle. He nods, understanding the significance without a word. You hand it over carefully, and he receives it with equal care, as if the letters themselves are listening. For a moment after he leaves, you stand still, hands resting on the table. The station feels quieter again, but not empty. There's a sense of having participated in something larger than yourself. You shake it off gently. Too much reflection slows the hands, and return to the remaining mail. You jot one final note in the ledger, ink drying quickly now as the air clears. The afternoon stretches ahead, calm and orderly. You're back where you're most comfortable, between stacks of paper, quietly keeping the world moving. By mid-afternoon, the station takes on a different kind of pressure, quieter, but heavier. The urgent mail has mostly passed through, yet you can feel the weight of expectation settling in. These remaining bundles aren't late. Not yet, but you know exactly who's waiting for them. Small towns, isolated farms, trading posts where the arrival of mail is the most significant event of the week. Sometimes the month. You glance at the destinations and picture them instinctively. A single dusty street. A general store with a porch. A handful of buildings clustered together like they're sharing warmth. For places like these, the mail isn't just information, it's connection. A mainstream fact that rarely gets poetic attention is that in many frontier communities, mail delivery schedules shaped daily life. People planned errands, meetings, even moods around when letters were expected to arrive. You straighten the stacks again, not because they've shifted, but because the thought of someone waiting makes you more careful. You imagine a shopkeeper pausing mid-conversation when a rider appears. A family gathering quietly as a letter is unfolded. These scenes will happen whether you think about them or not, but thinking about them sharpens your focus. You return to the ledger, reviewing entries with a slow, deliberate pace. Each line represents a promise kept, or about to be. Historians still argue whether the Pony Express truly mattered to everyday settlers or if its impact has been exaggerated by nostalgia. But you suspect the truth sits somewhere in the middle. Not everyone needed fast mail, but those who did felt it deeply. A light breeze drifts through the open window, carrying the smell of wet earth from the earlier rain. It stirs the papers just enough to remind you they're there. You place a paperweight, a smooth stone, the same one you noticed earlier, on the corner of a stack. It's an old habit, and one you appreciate more in moments like this. Some things are meant to stay put. There's a quirky tidbit you once overheard from a visiting clerk. In certain towns, people dressed differently on mail days, as if expecting news required a bit of ceremony. You smile faintly at the idea. Out here, the ceremony is invisible, ink, twine, and a sorter standing quietly at a table, but it's no less real. Another rider arrives, less hurried than the morning ones. His horse looks calmer too, ears relaxed, posture steady. This is the part of the day where endurance matters more than speed. You hand over the bundle meant for his route, and he checks it carefully, meeting your eyes with a look that says he knows exactly how much is riding with him. You give him a brief update. Weather's cleared. Trail should hold. He nods, satisfied, and turns to go. As the door closes behind him, you feel a familiar mix of relief and responsibility. Each departure lightens your load while increasing someone else's. You take a moment to stretch, Standing tall, rolling your shoulders back, the stiffness has crept in quietly, as it always does. You joke softly to yourself that if standing still were an Olympic sport, you'd at least make the qualifiers by now. The building creaks in response, as if agreeing. You return to the table and tidy the remaining paperwork. There's less mail now, but your attention doesn't waver. Sometimes fewer items require more care, not less. You update one final note in the ledger, then pause, pen resting lightly on the page. Everything is in order. Outside, the light has softened again, drifting toward late afternoon. You can sense the day beginning to slope downward. The way a hill looks gentler once you're past the peak. The station feels settled, content with the work done so far. You take a slow breath, letting it out just as slowly. The expectations of distant towns are no longer in your hands. They're on the road now. Moving steadily forward, you stand quietly for a moment, honoring that transition, then turn back to the table. There's still time left in the day, and you intend to use it well. The later afternoon has a way of loosening its grip on urgency. And with that looseness come the oddities. You notice them more when the pace slows. A parcel sits apart from the others, wrapped in heavier paper and tied with an enthusiasm that borders on distrust. You lift it carefully, testing its balance, and immediately sense it's not a letter at all, or at least, not just a letter. You turn it slightly, listening. Nothing rattles, which is reassuring. You check the label twice, then a third time, just to be polite. Odd items aren't unheard of in the Pony Express system, even though it was technically meant for letters only. A mainstream fact often mentioned quietly is that people sometimes bent the rules, slipping in small, lightweight objects as long as they didn't add much weight. Officially discouraged, practically inevitable. You set the parcel down and make a note in the margin of the ledger. Careful not to sound accusatory, just descriptive. There's an art to that. You've learned to describe without judging. Wrapped item, lightweight, that's enough. The rest is not your business. Nearby, another unusual bundle catches your attention, thicker than average. Edges uneven. When you lift it, you feel the stiffness of folded papers layered together. Drawings, maybe, or legal documents copied too many times. You imagine someone painstakingly assembling these pages, hoping the effort justifies the cost. Historians still argue how strictly stations enforced mail rules. But out here, enforcement often looks like quiet discretion. You handle these oddities gently, placing them where they won't be crushed or bent. There's a strange tenderness in this part of the job. You don't know what these items mean to the sender, but you know they mean something. That's usually enough to earn your care. A quirky tidbit surfaces from a story that's been told and retold. One station supposedly received a lock of hair tucked into a letter, tied with ribbon and scented faintly with perfume. Whether that's true or not, you wouldn't be surprised. The mail carries not just words, but small pieces of people's lives, trimmed to fit weight limits and sealed with hope. You glance toward the door, half expecting a rider to comment on the unusual bundle, but none does. When one finally arrives, you hand over the stacks without explanation. Riders don't ask unless something's wrong. He secures the odd parcel carefully, giving it a curious look before tucking it into place. You meet his eyes and give a slight shrug. He nods, mystery acknowledged, no further discussion required. As he leaves, you update the ledger once more, the pen gliding more slowly now. The day has taken some of the ink's sharpness, and the nib seems to appreciate the gentler pace. You clean it carefully, tapping excess ink away. Tools deserve respect too, especially late in the day. You step back from the table and survey what remains. Not much. A few letters waiting for the next scheduled pickup, neatly stacked and weighted with the stone. The station feels calm, almost reflective. You make a small joke to yourself that if the mail were a personality, it would be clearing its throat politely, preparing to say goodbye for the day. You tidy the table, aligning edges, returning unused twine to its hook. These small acts feel ceremonial, even if no one's watching. You've learned that endings deserve as much care as beginnings. Outside, the light has shifted again, warmer now, casting longer shadows. You take a slow breath and let it out, feeling the day settle around you. The odd items are gone. The mysteries moved along the route. Whatever stories they carry will unfold somewhere else. You return to the ledger one last time, reading through the day's notes. Everything makes sense. Nothing feels unfinished. You close the book gently, resting your hand on the cover for a moment longer than necessary. The afternoon is fading, and with it, the sense of constant motion. You straighten up, hands resting at your sides, and allow yourself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The strange, the ordinary, the meaningful, all passed through your hands today, and all are on their way. The sun sits lower now, angling its light through the window in a way that makes dust sparkle briefly before settling again. This is the accounting hour, the part of the day that doesn't involve movement, imagination, or anticipation, but quiet confirmation. You pull the ledger back toward you, its weight familiar, and open it to the first page of the morning. This is where the day must add up. You begin counting, bundles sent, bundles remaining, notes scribbled in margins. You trace each line with your finger as you read it back, verifying that nothing slipped past unnoticed. A mainstream fact that anchors this ritual is that Pony Express stations kept meticulous records. Not because anyone loved paperwork, but because trust across long distances depended on it. If something went missing, the ledger was where questions began. You count again, slower this time. Numbers don't change just because you want them to, but your confidence in them does. You compare tallies against the physical reality of the room, the empty hooks where sacks once hung, the cleared space by the door. Everything matches. The quiet satisfaction of that alignment settles in your chest like a deep breath. There's a quirky tidbit you remember from an old hand who trained you. Always count once like a machine, and once like a suspicious human. Machines miss context, humans miss patience. You smile faintly at the memory and do exactly that, scanning for anything that feels off rather than anything that's strictly wrong. You find a note you made earlier about the weather delay and reread it. Considering whether it needs clarification, you add a single word, temporary, and feel better for it. Historians still argue whether such marginal notes ever mattered beyond the day they were written. But you know they mattered to you, and sometimes that's enough. You check the ink one last time, closing the inkwell carefully. Spills at this hour feel personal. You wipe the nib and lay the pen neatly beside the ledger, parallel to the table's edge. The order feels deliberate. A quiet punctuation mark at the end of your working day. As you close the ledger, you listen to the sounds outside. Fewer now. The road has gone quiet. Riders distant or already at their next stops. The station feels larger without them, echoing just slightly when you move. You stack the remaining mail, few letters waiting for tomorrow, and secure them in a smaller sack, tying it with a knot that says, "We'll pick this up again soon." You step back and look at the table. It's not spotless, ink stains never truly leave, but it's honest. Used, ready for another day. You run your hand over the wood, feeling the grooves worn by years of similar hands. This place remembers work. A small joke drifts through your mind. If satisfaction had a sound, it would probably be this silence, interrupted only by the faint creak of cooling boards. You chuckle softly, then still yourself. The day doesn't need commentary, it needs closure. You turn off one lamp, then the other, letting dusk take over naturally. The light fades without resistance. You gather your coat and pause at the door, looking back one last time. Everything is in its place. Nothing left undone. You step outside and lock up, the key turning with the same reluctant click it had this morning. The air is cooler now, calmer. You breathe it in, slow and deep, and let the day slip from your shoulders. The last rider has already gone, and with him, the sense of being needed every second. What remains is a quiet so complete it almost hums. You stand just outside the station for a moment after locking the door, listening. No hooves, no voices, just the low sounds of evening settling into place, as if the land itself is exhaling after a long day. You linger there longer than necessary, hands in your coat pockets, feeling the temperature drop by degrees rather than leaps. This is the part of the day that never makes it into reports, the aftermath. A mainstream fact that rarely gets mentioned is that many Pony Express stations spent far more hours empty than busy. Most of the time, nothing happened, and yet, that nothing was essential. You step back inside briefly to collect a forgotten rag from the table. The station feels different now, almost unfamiliar without the anticipation of arrivals. Shadows stretch where light once fell straight. You fold the rag carefully, as if it deserves a proper ending too, and place it on the shelf. There's a moment of reflection as you move through the space one last time. You notice details you didn't have time for earlier. The uneven nail heads in the wall, the faint scratch marks near the doorframe, the way the map curls slightly at the corners. These are the quiet fingerprints of countless days like this one. Historians still argue whether the Pony Express was more legend than reality. But rooms like this insist it was real, slow, repetitive, and human. You pause near the table and rest your hand on its surface. The wood is cool now, no longer warmed by lamplight or motion. You think about how many letters passed through here today, how many worries, hopes, and mundane updates are now somewhere else because you stood in this exact spot. It's an odd feeling, knowing your influence travels farther than you ever will. A quirky tidbit comes to mind from a story you once heard. Some station workers believed that if you left a place too abruptly, it would remember you less kindly. So you take your time. You move slowly, deliberately, letting the space adjust to being empty again. Whether or not that belief holds any truth, it feels respectful. You step back outside and close the door gently, even though no one's around to hear it. The key turns smoothly this time, as if the station recognizes the end of the day. You secure it and slip the key into your pocket, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow, it will feel cold again. For now, it's simply there. The sky has softened into evening colors, muted oranges and pale blues blending without urgency. You take a deep breath and let your shoulders drop. The work is done. Nothing more is expected of you tonight. You start walking away, boots crunching softly on the ground. Each step carries you further from the table, the ledger, the careful stacks of paper. And with each step, the day loosens its hold, fading into memory, ready to be replaced by another just like it. You walk a little slower now, not because you're tired in the way muscles complain, but because the day has used up its need to rush you. The station is behind you, locked and quiet, already beginning the long stretch of waiting that defines its existence. Evening has taken over completely. The sky dims gently, as if someone is turning down a lamp rather than switching it off. You pause once more, looking back, not out of obligation, but habit. This place has held you for hours. Ask for your attention, your steadiness, your restraint. Now it asks for nothing at all. A mainstream fact settles into your thoughts. Most Pony Express stations were staffed by just 1 or 2 people at a time. Meaning much of the system relied on solitary routines exactly like the one you've lived through today. Alone, but not isolated. Quiet, but connected. As you turn away, you feel that subtle shift, the moment when responsibility loosens its grip. Your hands still smell faintly of ink and paper, even after wiping them clean. It's a scent that will linger into the night, a reminder that you were useful in a way that didn't require applause. You flex your fingers once more, noticing how the stiffness has softened into a pleasant heaviness. There's a quirky thought that drifts in, half amused. If someone were to ask what you did today, there would be no dramatic answer. You sorted, you waited, you paid attention, and yet, historians still argue whether the Pony Express mattered more for its symbolism than its practical impact. Standing here, with the evening cooling your skin, you suspect the truth is simpler. It mattered because people showed up and did the work, even when it looked boring. You begin the walk home. Whatever home means tonight, a room, a bunk, a place to lie down and let the world carry on without you for a while. Your steps fall into an easy rhythm. With each one, the sounds of the station fade further, replaced by the softer noises of night, distant insects, the whisper of wind through grass, the far-off call of something settling in. Your thoughts slow. The ledger, the routes, the careful decisions all drift into the background. They don't disappear, they simply stop asking for attention. Tomorrow will bring them back. Tonight doesn't need them. You breathe in, then out, a little deeper than before. The day is complete, nothing is missing. The night feels wide and gentle now, like a long exhale that stretches across the land. You let your shoulders relax fully, allowing the last traces of tension to dissolve. There's no schedule pressing on you here, no bundles to weigh, no routes to trace with your finger, just the steady, reassuring knowledge that the system you were part of keeps moving, even while you rest. Your pace slows further, almost drifting. Thoughts soften at the edges, becoming less about words and more about sensation, the cool air, the steady ground beneath your feet, the simple comfort of being done. You don't replay the day, you let it blur, like ink spreading harmlessly into paper until the sharp lines disappear. If your eyes feel heavy, that's fine. If your breathing deepens without you noticing, even better. You've earned this quiet. The world doesn't need anything more from you right now. And as the last images of the station fade, wooden table, lamplight, neatly tied bundles, You allow him to slip away gently, replaced by stillness, warmth, and rest.